Hello, everyone. My name is Julie Arts, and I'm an author, editor, and book coach. And I am delighted to be here today with Deb Miller, one of my clients and friends, to talk about her memoir, Forget the Fairy Tale and Find Your Happiness. Here's a little bit about Deb. Her bio reads small town girl, corporate exec, elephant writer, mom. Deb's journey from parenting to suburbia to Fortune 500 C suites taught her that real courage isn't in slaying dragons. It's letting go of who you were told to be and finding who you really are. And now, an part-time marketing professor and author, Dr. Miller shares her hard-won wisdom with readers ready to reclaim their own narrative. Deb resides in an enchanted forest outside Seattle, where the landscaping projects are endless and enjoyable. Welcome, Deb. So nice to see you again.
I'm so happy to be here today with you, Julie, who used to be a neighbor of mine. Although, when we started this book journey together back during the pandemic, I was based in Florida and we did not know that we would eventually become neighbors.
Right. It's such a funny coincidence, right? That we started talking about where we were, and you said, "Oh, yeah, I'm building a house." And I'm like, that is right up the street from me. So we ended up as neighbors and went through the process of working on your book together. And I just want to say that when I first saw the pitch for your book and this idea of following one woman's journey using the evolution of the Disney princesses as a parallel to describe your own evolution, I was instantly hooked on that idea. And that's really, really what drew me to the story. And I think it's drawing readers to the story as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was never the type of little girl that was, a big fan of Snow White or Cinderella, but when I was working on my dissertation, my doctorate, I ran across on the topic of corporate rebranding. I ran across how Disney had rebranded the Disney Princess franchise to keep up with the times. And the women's movement had happened, and women had gone from damsels in distress to the Bells and the Ariels, and they always had a prince still in the picture saving the day, to the more modern warrior princesses were Merida and Moana, and there wasn't even a prince in the picture. And I thought that was kind of like my life. So when I was starting to work on this memoir, I thought I was looking for something kind of universal and relatable as a somewhat of a framework that people could relate to. Because I mean, who wants to read a memoir about someone kind of unknown? And again, I could relate to it. And as I was telling my neighbors during the pandemic, you're shouting across the yards, like, "What are you working on?" "I'm working on a memoir." And they're like, "What's it about?" And I would tell them, "You know how the Disney princess kind of transform over time?" And so did I. And like, "So did I." And I thought, "Oh, maybe I'm onto something." So it turns out it's just really, it kicks off each chapter, a little cultural commentary about how they were doing in a kind of a fun, interesting way, just very short little paragraph. And then it gets into my life, and then it comes back to the next chapter and how they were changing. And it was really, we were changing in parallel. And if you think about it, the media was changing too. Like on TV, there were Mary Tyler Moore was a character that was, a modern woman at the time, and then Claire Huxtable. They were letting women work all of a sudden. It wasn't like the June Cleavers of my mom's day, vacuuming in the pearls. So the society was changing as women were changing, and TV and Disney and others were reflecting that as we were changing. So I use that, and I think that's what's relatable for a lot of women.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. So you were talking a little bit about the pandemic, and this didn't necessarily start out as a memoir that you were thinking was going to go to publication. It started more as a collection of stories for your family, right?
It did. It did. I mean, I describe myself as an accidental author. I had just become a grandmother right when the pandemic started, and so I cleaned out the closets. I was kind of looking for something meaningful to do to mark the time, and I had two really cool grandmothers, and so I thought, well, I don't want to just give my granddaughter this box of photos someday and have her have all these questions about their about my life like I did about my grandmother. So I thought I'll start writing down these family stories. And then they started being more like about my life because that's what I knew most about. And was talking to the kids, and it became like this thousand-piece puzzle, like stories putting together all these different things. And I needed a framework, and that's where the Disney princess thing came in. Like, I needed something like the edges of a puzzle. I needed the framework for the stories. And when I started talking to people and they were saying like, I want to read that book, I thought, well, maybe I do have kind of a book here. So I sent it off only to one publisher, and they really liked it. And what they liked about it was this whole Disney princess thing. So people were really kind of grabbing onto that. And that's when I thought, well, maybe there is something here. But even still, it's like, do you really want to tell people about your private life? Again, I started it for the kids and the grandkids. Do I really want to share it with the world? And the more I wrote, the more I saw was a story of transformation. The more I thought, I think if I can show other women about how, yeah, you can carve your own path and that's okay. You don't have to follow society's script, which is what I did. I clearly did not follow the path that I thought society had mapped out for me to follow what my mom had done, that's okay. And so I wanted other women to know it's okay to carve your own path. And so when it becomes something bigger than yourself, then that's when you give yourself permission to share your story with the world. And that's how it became published.
Yeah, and you really carved your own path in your approach to marketing this story as well, where I think that your experience in corporate marketing really, really helped you think outside the box. So tell us a little bit about your book launch and some of the things that you did that are maybe a little bit different than how some other authors have launched their books.
Well, as you know, I look at this whole book journey in maybe three different phases. There's the writing phase, and for me, that was somewhat fun because going back in my youth, I like to write a little bit. I like to read. That was kind of fun, cranking out those stories. It wasn't so much fun the middle phase where I had to do all the editing with you. I mean, fun, you made it fun, and thank goodness you kept me on track with schedules. You gave me bite-sized pieces instead of 500 to-dos. You gave me like 5 things at a time, due by this date, and it was all manageable. I never could have done that on my own. So thank you, Julie, for making it possible, or there would not have been a book. There's so many other things you did that helped me get there we can talk through. But then the third phase after the writing and the editing was the marketing. And that's where I can get very excited. And that's probably different than most of your clients. They're probably true career writers, and maybe they also enjoy the editing process. I don't know. But for me, I really came alive in the marketing phase because that was my career. So, yes, and I did want to do things maybe a little bit differently, a little bit out of the box. I enjoyed trying different things. So, for example, my publication day, I belong to a pub, a local pub. Craft beer is quite popular here in the Seattle area, as you know. So I belong to a pub, and so I had pub day at the pub. And so anyone who showed proof of purchase of my book, whether they had bought it before, or if they bought it there on site, or if they bought it like through their phone, like right on the spot, I bought them a beer. And so that drove had a nice little spike of sales that day, or again, the pre-sales. So that was all very nice. And then also my granddaughter's preschool is right across the street. So I ran a promotion with them that if they came over any cash sales that day, I would donate to their school. And so that drove a lot of attendance. So there's like 400 parents or something that belong to the school, the staff, and all these people are coming over, and it drove a lot of attention. Everybody wants to know what's going on over at the postdoc today. So anyway, that was really interesting, and it drove a lot of attention. That was one thing. And then a couple of days later, my actual book launch was at Barnes and Noble, and there we had, instead of the traditional book reading that a lot of authors do, I had some actresses perform a couple scenes, and that was so cool to see it come alive. And then that idea went even further. A friend of mine told me about a contest that they have by the International Memoir Writing Association based down in San Diego. It has an annual memoir showcase. And I already had the scene ready from that pub week, ready to go from my local actresses here in Seattle. So I submitted it, and it actually won and was performed in front of about 500 people in San Diego a couple months later on stage. And that was just like a highlight of my whole book journey, I think, seeing a professional actress perform that. And I would like to ask you what your impression was, because you've seen the video clip of the actress performing, and probably next to me, having read this book, you've read it like the next many times.
It's true, it's true. I have to tell you, it's the first time that I have seen one of my clients' books performed in that way, and it was really meaningful. I like you said, I know the book very well, and the scene is actually from the end of the book. And it was quite moving because to see it come alive on the page, I think the the last chapter is my favorite chapter because I know we've talked about this before, but I know what started out as a pandemic story and a story about transformation of yourself and your own life, I think really turned into, at least in my opinion, a love letter to your children, right? That Prince Charming and the romantic love are not at the center of your journey. Your children and then eventually your grandchildren are as well. So I really loved that aspect of it. And that really comes home in that final scene. So we'll share the link to the YouTube video in the show notes so that you all can experience it too. And I can tell you, it's going to make you want to read the book because it just is absolutely stunning. And so for me, that was a little bit of a bucket list item too, to see one of my clients' books performed in that way on stage. And of course, the accolades that you've been racking up with this book speak to the fact that this idea of finding your happiness, of bucking the trends, is something that really appeals to women right now. And it's leading to some additional opportunities now that the book is out in the world, right?
Yes. I mean, well, and let's jump in. I could go in so many different directions because we've done so many other non-traditional things with the book launch in the last few months. But I want to jump in and say something that you really helped me with. Right after I thought I was done so many times with the editing process. And then right towards the end, Julie says to me, "Now, Deb, you need to think about a different title." And, and I thought, oh my gosh. And I loved working with her just every step of the way, but each time she was always gently pushing me, nudging me to like the next thing. And every time it was making it so much better. And so I thought, I have to have a different title. Like I'd had the same title for like 4 years or something into this, or 3 years, whatever, at that point. And I thought, I have to have a new title. And this is right before we're going to officially give it to the same publisher that we've been working with. And so I just really had to adjust to the whole news of that. And then she said, "Yeah, you need something that this is a bit narrow." And I believe it was a princess path or something is what I said, and originally had been. And I said, "Oh God, okay, you need something more provocative or more universal or more something." And so, of course, I came up with, Forget the Fairy Tale and Find Your Happiness. And it turned out to be, I love it, I love it, I love it, but I really wasn't happy with the idea of having to come up with a new one at the time. So, but happened by Julie pushing me to come up with the one, and the one that I did come up with, it opened up a whole new world of talking about this universal topic of happiness. And so one of the topics that I set up a happiness panel. It happened to be at Third Place Books here in Seattle with two University of Washington professors. One that's in the psych department, has a happiness lab and teaches a course on happiness. Fascinating professor. And then another was Ronit Plank, who has a podcast on memoir, but she also teaches a class on memoir at UW. This was a live talk at Third Place Books, but it was so cool And I had an author come up to me, 2 authors came up to me right after that, and they said, "This was like the best author talk I've ever been to. But aren't you, Deb, a little bit disappointed that it wasn't focused so much on your book? It was like book on the side talking about happiness, because mine was the book that was being launched." And I said, "No, like I love because for me, that's what it's really all about." And that's what I guess the point I'm trying to make to your clients. When you're doing your book launch, it doesn't have to be like, here's my book and let me talk about my bio and my book and all that. It can and maybe it even should be something bigger than just your book. And that's what changing the title opened up for me, because now I'm talking a lot about it and I'm finding people want to talk about the happiness topic, like the science behind it. What are some tips about it? And I'm digging into the research. That's the doctorate part of me and the curious part of me. And I'm finding out so much more. And I'm actually headed back to my home state of Indiana, Julie's home state too. We also have that in common.
Mhm.
And I'm speaking at Purdue, my undergrad annual alumni women's conference this summer in Indianapolis on the topic of the pursuit of happiness in the modern world. So all that came out of Julie pushing me to change my title, and it happened to have happiness in it. So getting something that's more universal and relatable, and then tying that in as you go on your book launch can really pay off in big dividends that you never anticipated.
Yeah, my biggest concern with The Princess Path as a title is that people would think it was a story of someone who followed it, who followed society's views. So forget the fairy tale to me says right up front, I'm subverting the status quo, which you absolutely did in a number of ways in the story. And I love the fact that happiness has opened that door for you as well to these additional speaking opportunities. And one of the things that I always encourage memoirists to think about is what is the universal that's represented by your specific story, right? Some people want to start with the universal and only stay focused there, but it's through the specific events of your own life and that transformation journey that you're talking about that one person's specific story then becomes universal and taps into that collective feeling. In this case, on women trying to find happiness in a world that had some pretty tough rules and regulations for us to follow over the last 100 years, right? And that have been changing. So
Yeah, I think authors need to play to their strengths. I've now met so many wonderful people through this whole book journey, other authors specifically, and like there's one that was a former police officer, and her book happened to be a memoir about domestic violence. And so she's now developed a course, and she through her police connections, she's teaching women, about domestic violence prevention. So I thought that was a great way of aligning with her strengths and so forth. Another sailed to Tahiti when she was a 14-year-old with her family. So she kept saying, "I'm not a public speaker. I'm not a public speaker." But she knows how to sail. And so when she was promoting her book, she went around to yacht clubs. And so it was very easy for her to talk about sailing with these yacht clubs. Her book was about whitewater rafting. So, of course, she's tied in with rafting clubs. And, I could go on, but, people will say like they were not good at speaking, but they can find their tribe and they can work with that. Or, maybe you're very comfortable with libraries. There's one author I know that she had a really tough childhood, but she found her happy place was being in a library as a young girl. So she really made it a passion as an author. She wrote, like, she made herself a quota, like 5 or 10 libraries a week. She would solicit prior to launching her book and write a letter saying, "Is there any way that," and she would give all the right reasons and send to her one sheet off and say, I hope you'll, take a look at carrying my book and so forth. And she has like 200 libraries or something that now have her book. And so there's all kinds of ways you can do, but stay true to your authentic self, like what you feel comfortable doing.
That's so true. Writers come to me all the time with so many fears around platform because they think, well, I have to have 100,000 followers on TikTok or I'm not going to be able to succeed or I have to be on Facebook even though it gives me the ick. And the truth is platform can mean many, many different things. And if you find something that you're passionate about, that's going to come through in everything you do, right? I personally am moving away from social media because it's starting to give me the ick. You know what I really love? I really love Substack and YouTube, which is why you all are watching this on Substack or YouTube and not on Facebook or Instagram, right? So there are other people who love Facebook and Instagram. You go with what works for you, but part of building platform is understanding what you're going to like and what's going to light you up because that's going to show through in whatever your end product is. Whereas if you're awkwardly dancing on TikTok with your book and you feel really uncomfortable, that's going to come through too. And so nobody has to do that part of it, right? Find the platform that works for you, find the way that you can reach readers, whether it's at the local brew pub or on stage or something else entirely. Yeah, that's
You
great
don't have to
advice.
do everything either. And like when I went back home again to Indiana, like the song Back Home Again in Indiana. I did a little book tour there, 7 stops in 3 days, and I had so much fun, but I had a reason to go back there. There were a lot of people I wanted to reconnect with. So it wasn't so much to sell books, I did, but it was really to reconnect with people. My mom had passed away a year before, and I didn't want to leave my memory of Indiana with like the funeral and all that. And I wanted to thank a lot of people who had helped out with my mom over the last few years. So I went back there and I was able to connect with a lot of people from my university and people, childhood friends. And I had the best time doing all that. And I just really enjoyed it. And out of that led to all these things that are coming about now this year. I keep thinking I'm done going back to Indiana, but it keeps leading to just more and more opportunities. Don't be afraid to follow, and doors will open and follow them, go through. And so when I went back, I met these IU professors, and now this is leading to like women's studies program. They really like the whole tie to how my book shows women's transformation and so forth. And so now they're putting it on their recommended reading lists. And I think that's really interesting. Oregon State is looking into it and Washington State and so forth. So it's just whole new avenues that I never even originally imagined that my book is finding in this, calling it phase 2, the life of it. So you never knew that this would happen when you first start writing this book.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, so let's talk a little bit about the writing and editing process because you did say that that wasn't really your favorite part. And I'm just noticing something really interesting, which is that part of the reason I wanted to talk to you is because your marketing background in corporate marketing gave you a fresh approach um to marketing your book. And my background is actually in technical writing and project planning. And I think that gives me a little bit of a fresh perspective on working on a book length project because you talked about how I broke things down into chunks for you so that you could get them done because we took probably 3 turns through that manuscript before it went back to she writes for the final proofreading and layout and all of that kind of stuff. And there were some times when you were ready to be done.
I was ready to be done right away. But yes, I liked your prop. Again, I put my trust in you and I followed your process. But like the first thing that you did for me was you said, Deb, you wrote this. I mean, and you said it much more diplomatically than this. You said in a much nicer way, but Deb, you can't just write chronologically. You have to like mix it up. You have to make it read more like a novel or it's not very interesting. Well, I hadn't written it to make it be interesting. Remember, I was writing it for my kids, my family. And so I thought, oh, okay, well, I don't want to make it boring. It's going to be kind of like an assignment, then I want to make it good because I was always like an A student. So I want to have a good project if I'm going to do this. So all right, I can rise to this challenge. And so what you helped me, I don't remember who had the idea. I think maybe it was me, but we came up with having these lessons. So we had flashbacks of the historical. So the little things that were my childhood became kind of flashbacks that were lessons that my mom taught me, like what things a good girl would do. So they became little flashbacks that might be in chapter one or in the first three chapters. Then later chapters, the lessons were things my kids were playing back to me of things that they learned from me, which was kind of interesting. And again, it fit with the transformation. Thank goodness they were good things that they had learned, like be yourself. Thank goodness. And the kids turned out okay. So that's a good thing too. Okay, so the lessons, that's how we broke that up. And then let's see, what else did you help me? Oh, you helped me with the we need a little drama. So you taught me about what an E structure is, which I had never heard of course, but you explained it in a way that I could relate to. And that was, you said, have you seen or have you read the book Wild? Which of course I had not read, but I had seen the movie starring Reese Witherspoon. And I did, after that point, get the audiobook, I must confess, of Wild by Cheryl Strayed. And I used it while hiking here in the mountains, appropriately so, the Pacific Crest Trail where she hiked. And that was my go-to for when I was hiking. And you explained that, okay, you remember Deb when when the book starts out like a lowercase e, she starts out in the future and then it circles back to that little moment when she's on the mountain and she loses her boot and she gets all frustrated because it falls down the mountain and she throws the other one to go with it. And then she comes back to that moment later and it maybe a couple times in her story. Yes, I remember that. You said, well, you need to think of a dramatic moment. We're going to start the book with that, and then we're going to come back to that a time or two later in your book. And I thought, okay, so that was my assignment, and I had to think of a moment. It turned out to be a car crash moment, which was easy for me to come up with because it was a very traumatic moment for me in my life. So you taught me how to do that, add a little, drama to the whole book. I've had a number of people mention that to me, like that really did kind of draw them in right from the beginning. They wanted to know about that, and then they kind of forgot about it, and then it hit them again, later in the book. So I think it worked.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit like the title change. What it did was it let us know that you were not going to be on the princess path, even though when we went back to your childhood, you were trying so hard, hanging on, trying to be on it, right? For quite a while. And what you don't want to do, you want to make the right promise to your reader, open it in the opening of a novel or a memoir. And you don't want the promise to be like, I know she was trying for the first 100 pages to stay on the princess path, and then 100 pages in, surprise, she didn't, right? We want to say kind of upfront, something different is going on. And so that car crash created that opportunity for us to see that Prince Charming was not necessarily what you had in your life, that you were already starting to take control. And then, wait, but how did she get there? Then we circle back and get your early stories. And I loved the way that the lessons turned out as a frame. Almost everybody, when they start off writing a memoir, starts with an autobiography. I was born on February 7th, 1975 in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I had these siblings and this, and it makes sense because you're telling yourself the story, you're contextualizing all of it. And of course, our births were very important to us as individuals and memoirists. But then what you have to find is a narrower slice of your life to be on the page for the actual memoir, or it would be 550 pages long, and it would be a doorstop instead of a memoir that's starting conversations about happiness and women's transformation journeys and stuff like that. So, and that's exactly what you ended up with.
But you did it in such a kind and patient way. I mean, if you had told me from the beginning, like, Deb, this is just such a wreck of a manuscript and it's going to take like 3 times through it or 4, whatever it took to get you there, and it's going to take like 24 months or whatever, we're going to change your title. I would have just had a heart attack and probably said, no way. But and it's going to cost X amount or whatever. And by the way, I thought you were extremely reasonable with your pricing. I'm going to tell your right now. Like, in the whole scheme of the whole book thing, I thought it was just money really well spent. I wouldn't have had the book that I had. It wouldn't have won 8 awards already without your care. I don't think you wrote anything for me. You were like the best teacher ever. You made me go back and write it. And I just really can't thank you enough. So I want to take advantage of your video session here right now to emphasize that. And I did acknowledge it at the back of the book, but I can't say it enough. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, I love finding these kinds of stories that really capture my imagination and helping the writer translate them. We all have a perfect kernel of an idea in our head, and sometimes getting it onto paper is really, really hard. And sometimes it takes a little extra help from somebody that's done it before, and that's where I come in. And it's the best job I've ever had. I'm so happy to be doing this and not still doing tech writing and tech project management, to be totally honest. So the
Well, you also pushed me in a lot of areas. Like you'd say, like, people are going to want to know why you made this decision.
Mhm.
Why did you stay, in this relationship, or why did you do this? And either A, I thought it was obvious, or B, I didn't really want to reveal that much, or I don't know. And so you did push me in different areas, and I in the end, I always acquiesced to your, better judgment. So because really I didn't have I had a couple beta readers, but it was a very small circle of people reading it, in the beginning. So
Yeah, yeah. And I do recommend that people get beta readers because even the best book coach only has fresh eyes for one, maybe two reads. And we did more than that. So at a certain point, every time I'm reading, the layers of all the other times that I've read are there in my consciousness. And fresh eyes can help find the things that make sense to you and I because we knew the story so well, but maybe weren't going to make sense to a cold audience. And so those beta readers, I think, provided you some really helpful feedback.
they were helpful. They were helpful.
Well, and the result has been wonderful because in addition to all of the accolades that you've gotten and the speaking opportunities that you have had in the past and that are upcoming, you've also sold a lot of books, and more books than a lot of memoirists sell. And that's really a great accomplishment. And in addition to just the paperbacks, you're selling ebooks and audiobooks here and in Canada. So I think it's a pretty huge success.
Well, thank you. And actually, it's interesting, but the book went to the Frankfurt Book Fair too. The American consulate had a representative in Frankfurt, and they picked up a copy of it for their consulate, and then they recommended it to the consulate in Paris, and then now the Czech Republic, Poland, uh, the UK, Italy. I'm going to forget somebody. Austria. I don't know. There's like a whole bunch of them are now wanting it for their libraries for Americans that are in these various countries. Isn't that bizarre?
It's wonderful, and y'all will find out when you go and read this book, because 'cause I'm telling you, go read it, that there is an aspect of international travel that is an important part of the book. So I sort of love that it's on a European tour right now.
Yes, I know. And so I'm just and again, I never imagined any of this. And so I'm having so much fun with it. And I guess one part I haven't mentioned, but I'm also having a lot of fun with my daughter, who are both happen to be in marketing. So like they're helping me on the marketing part too. They have ideas and they've done things to support it. And so all this is just turned into one big fun fest. Like my one daughter posted on LinkedIn about the pub day, and 2,500 people within like an hour liked it, or whatever you do on LinkedIn. And a bunch
Mhm.
came to the pub day thing because she's based here in Seattle. She's at Google. And then the other one said, "Mom, we need to get you into TikTok." And I said, "Does that sell books?" And she said, "Well, different people will look at it, like, who knows?" And so I thought, okay. She said, "There's book talkers." I'm like, okay. So, and I said, "Well, what do you do on TikTok about books?" She said, "Well, we'll do a home tour, like 73 Questions with Vogue. That's something where you do celebrities do home tours." And she said, "Do you have a cool house? Like, we'll do a home tour." I said, "Well, and, like, we're not gonna do a 10-minute home tour like Taylor Swift." She said, "No, we'll do like a 1 minute. We'll put it on like really fast forward and we'll ask, so I'll come." She lives in Miami. She said, "I'll come and I'll ask you some questions real quick." So she came and she did that, and we had 12,000 views within like a day. So I don't know if this sells any of those 1,200 books, but it's been fun working with my daughters on different ways to potentially get different eyes on the book. And so that's what the best part, and again, reconnecting with childhood friends and meeting people like you, Julie, and these different professors and just, my neighbors that had the book club and all these other book clubs, by the way. I love talking to these people because then they tell me their story. When we go there, like you think, what are we going to talk about? Like, I don't want to necessarily talk about myself. I don't ever have to worry about it because they start talking about themselves at these book clubs. So it's all been just one big, wonderful journey, and it is continuing. And thank you for being a part of it. I've loved every second.
Yeah, well, thank you for trusting me with your story. I've loved to be a part of it too, and it's so obvious from all of the excitement that you have tapped into something really, really important and universal. So I wish you the best of luck as you continue on your speaking tour about the book, as the book continues its world tour around consulates in Europe, and let's keep in touch.
Absolutely. Let me know if I can ever give an endorsement for any potential author. I'd be happy
Yeah.
to.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.